Hi everyone, I'd like to show you how to configure a Layer 2 switch and a firewall for when PCs access the Internet. As shown in the figure, PC1 and PC2 access the Internet through a switch and a firewall. The gateway of PCs is deployed on the firewall. The switch provides only Layer 2 forwarding. The configuration roadmap is as follows. 1. Configure interface-based VLAN assignment on the switch to implement Layer 2 forwarding. 2. If the connected firewall interface is a Layer 2 interface, configure a VLAN if interface to implement communication with the switch. If the connected firewall interface is a Layer 3 interface, configure a VLAN termination sub-interface to implement communication with the switch. The USG is used as an example. The configurations of other firewalls are similar. Let's move to the configuration procedure. First, let's look at how to configure the switch. There are 2 steps. Step 1. Configure interfaces connected to PCs as access interfaces and add them to VLAN 2 and VLAN 3 respectively. Step 2. Configure the interface connected to the firewall as a trunk interface and add it to VLAN 2 and VLAN 3. Now let's look at how to configure the firewall. When the firewall interface is a Layer 3 interface, 5 steps are needed. Step 1. Configure a termination sub-interface. Before configuring a termination sub-interface, create the corresponding VLAN. Then configure a VLAN and an IP address for the termination sub-interface. Step 2. Configure DHCP and DNS to assign IP addresses and specify DNS server address to Internet users. Here, the interface address pool is used to allocate IP addresses. The configured DNS server address is a public one. In practice, use the DNS server address allocated by a carrier. Step 3. Configure zones and an interzone policy. Configure trust and untrust zones. Add the downlink interface and the corresponding sub-interfaces to the trust zone. Add the uplink interface to the untrust zone. Finally, enable the interzone policy for all zones. If users require high network security, you can enable the interzone policy for specified zones. Step 4. Configure an IP address for the interface connected to the Internet and a static root. The static root is the default root, and the next hop address of the default root is 200.0.0.1. Step 5. Configure NAT so that Internet users can access the Internet. Here, NAT can also be configured in EasyIP plus interface mode. The configuration is now complete. The Layer 2 interface configuration of the firewall is similar to the Layer 3 configuration. We only need to change the sub-interface in the VLAN if interface configuration. There are also 5 steps. Step 1. Configure VLAN if interfaces and assign IP addresses to the VLAN if interfaces. Step 2. Configure DHCP and DNS to assign IP addresses and specify DNS server address to Internet users. Step 3. Configure zones and interzone policy. Step 4. Configure an IP address for the interface connected to the Internet and a static root. Step 5. Configure NAT so that Internet users can access the Internet. Till now, the Layer 2 interface configuration of the firewall is also complete. Let's move to the operations. Step 1. Configure IP addresses and gateway addresses for PCs. The IP address of PC1 is 192.168.1.2, and the gateway address is 192.168.1.1. The IP address of PC2 is 192.168.2.2. And the gateway address is 192.168.2.1. Step 2. Configure an IP address and a gateway address for the PC on the public network. The IP address is 200.0.0.1, and the gateway address is 200.0.0.2. Step 3. Configure the switch. Run the VLAN batch command to create VLAN 2 and VLAN 3. Configure interfaces connected to PCs. Add GE002 connected to PC1 to VLAN 2, and add GE003 connected to PC2 to VLAN 3. configure the interface connected to the firewall. Add GE001 connected to the firewall to VLAN 2 and VLAN 3. The switch configuration now is complete. Let's see the firewall configuration. The firewall that uses a Layer 3 interface is used as an example. The Layer 2 interface configuration is similar to the Layer 3 interface configuration and is not mentioned here. Step 1. Configure a termination sub-interface. Create a VLAN and configure the VLAN and IP address. Step 2. Configure DHCP and DNS to assign IP addresses and specify DNS server address to intranet users. Enable DHCP. Configure Gigabit Ethernet 001.1, use the interface address pool, and configure the DNS server address. Perform the same configurations on Gigabit Ethernet 001.2. Step 3. Configure zones and an interzone policy. Configure trust and untrust zones. Configure the interzone policy. Step 4. Configure an IP address for the interface connected to the Internet and a static root. Assign IP address to 00.0.0.2 to GE002. Configure a default root. Step 5. Configure NAT so that intranet users can access the Internet. The policy source command indicates that only IP addresses in the network segment 192.168.0.0 are translated into the public network IP address of 200.0.0.2. The configurations of the Layer 2 switch and firewall are complete. Let's check whether functions are available. Check whether the user PC can ping the PC on the public network. PC1 and PC2 can ping the PC on the public network. To obtain more information about common configurations and typical features of Huawei switches, see the All About Switches threads. How can we find these threads? We can enter, quote, all about switches, unquote, site:/Huawei.com. In the search field of Google, and click any of the displayed links to enter Huawei Enterprise Support Community. For details about more features, visit the home page. The All About Switches threads describe typical configurations and users' questions about Huawei switches. Okay, that's all about today's sharing. Thank you.